Nier is an interesting character within the lore of Death Note because of how much he and the second part as a whole add to the table. Him being the only one to legitimately disrespect Kira to the point of underestimation, and the fact that he was the ultimate victor of this long battle in the end gives us massive insight into the flaws of Light, Mellow, and especially L, and lets us know where they went wrong. For example, Nier lets us know that the others lost because of their lust for victory and satisfaction of their respective egos. Some evidence for Nier not wanting that in the video you can watch through the card above. Light lost because he became too overconfident and deranged and consequently severely underestimated his opponents. Mello dug a hole for himself so deep and consumed his entire being with jealousy to such an extent that by the time he cast his jealousy aside, the best he could do was enact a plan involving his death. And if you believe that he did not plan on helping Nier or dying, then Mello died because of one careless jealous act. And finally, L's refusal to accept he is wrong and refusal to believe Light isn't Kira is something Light easily exploited to not only kill L but clear his name long after L's death. Except while Nier does not activate lust for victory or the satisfaction of his ego, to say he wasn't susceptible to his hubris would be a mistake. Nier was someone who severely underestimated Light and Mikumi's intelligence, most likely because of their sense of justice, judging from how he called Takeda stupid for virtually no reason at all. This underestimation is why Nier certainly would have lost had Mello not kidnapped Takeda, and consequently had Mikumi expose the real notebook to Nier, resulting in him learning Mikumi, Takeda, and Light have formed a strategy which certainly would have killed Nier, the task force, and the SBK, which would have resulted in Kira's victory. Nier learning of how intelligent his opponents really are was a necessary event to humble Nier and teach him not to underestimate his opponents and other people, but you can learn more about this in an analysis I'll link in the description. Now that you know the relevant aspects of Nier's character arc and the most explicit ones we see in the series, I do think that this actually ties into the themes of the narrative and what we see of the flaws of Light, Mello, and L. What I think Nier's character arc, him overcoming his overconfidence and discarding his ego, represents is a reinforcement of the idea of ego leading to the other character's downfall, it being a red herring of sorts. We see someone who is egotistical enough to not see through his opponent's strategy because of his overconfidence. Then we see that character getting rid of their overconfidence, with him getting rid of that overconfidence being the thing that saved his life. This is a perfect way to demonstrate that one's ego is usually the downfall, because here we see the only surviving player having won only because of him overcoming his ego. In fact, I think that the overconfidence Nier displayed and overcame seems to be a mixture of sorts, of the respective egos of both Light and L. It was similar to Light's in the sense that it involved the underestimation of his opponents, and it is similar to L's in the sense that it involved him being far too rigid in how he perceives himself. If we're thinking under the assumption that Mello did indeed overcome his jealousy himself, then he's significant in the sense that him overcoming his own ego allowed Nier to overcome his. When I made my video pointing out how Mello symbolically like Light when he lets jealousy control his actions but can finally complete L when he didn't let his jealousy in the way of his actions, I meant that Mello need to get rid of the traits L shared with Light, like his childish nature and lust for victory, and complete L by getting rid of his negative traits which caused L's downfall. Nier had to do something similar here in order to achieve victory. Of course, despite the fact that Mello had learned this lesson before Nier didn't even catalyze it, Mello ended up losing and dying despite completing L, and that's possibly because while Nier simply underestimated his opponents, Mello had a direct lust for power and victory, which meant his situation is much more extreme. Now with all that said, I want to share some of my thoughts and opinions on the overall character of Nier, mainly his moral compass. So you know that besides Light, Nier is the only one out of the 4 genie to actually have a sense of justice and fight for it. Nier seems to be utilitarian to a minimalistic extent, only taking drastic measures if actually necessary, and he's also a pragmatist who doesn't believe in one absolute morality. Despite this, a massive character flaw of Nier's is how he's prioritizing respecting L's wish and finding proof and ending the case cleanly, over actually simply stopping Kira and preventing the deaths, and it's especially frustrating for a character who normally have very pragmatic ideals. Mikumi Takeda killed thousands of people ever since Nier had definitive proof of Mikumi being ex-Kira, and yet he lets all those deaths happen because he wants to find proof and to clean defeat Light. What Nier should have done was capture Mikumi, confiscate the notebook, then kill Light. He could have prevented so many deaths and he would have defeated the source of all the Kiras, but no. He really wanted to do something as abstract as defending L's pride, and he almost died because of it. It's really an iffy matter because Nier is prioritizing and respecting this dead guy who he knows doesn't have a sense of justice over his own sense of justice. This is especially concerning because, I mean, one would think that after taking the case much more seriously following Mel's death, that Nier would actually place greater importance in saving human life over trying to be L post-canon, happen, but we see in the one shot that Nier goes as far as stalling in the Kida case because he's trying to become L, and recalls a time when L said that he only takes cases, which pique his interest. However, when Nier does learn that he ended up not being the same as L and solved the case while not following L's methods, that is when Nier must learn to not actually place too much importance on succeeding L and actually act for justice. But I've already somewhat discussed that before, and this talk of Nier's moral compass, I admit, wasn't really relevant to my main thesis, nor did it come with its own insightful claim, but yeah, this is essentially my take on what Nier's character arc means for the themes of the series, and feel free to share your thoughts down in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe if you're interested.